The boom-bust cycle. This is something that is very rarely understood in its proper form. Many people call it the business cycle. Some people call it the debt cycle. And so what we are going to look into today is what causes the boom-bust cycle, number one, and why does the boom make the bust inevitable? And if that bust is actually inevitable, why are there historical examples where it seems like there was no bust where there should have been one? Ready? Let's dive in. In case you haven't heard yet, I've got a new course coming out soon on portfolio allocation mastery. It is 60% off right now for the first week of pre-orders only. Sign up with the link in the description below. It will never be this price again. Again, it's 60% off using the promo code Heretic60, Heretic60, link in the description below. All right, so we are looking at the boom-bust cycle. Right now, we are arguably in the bust part of this cycle. Now, a lot of people have, especially mainstream economics, calls this the business cycle. Basically, they say, hey, there are times of growth that are followed by times of decline. Nobody really knows what causes it. So we just got to go along and invest in a 60-40 portfolio of mutual funds and bonds, and everything will be great. In reality, it's a little bit more predictable than that, and we know what causes it when we look back at history and understand the way money works. That's why it's actually called a boom-bust cycle or a debt cycle, because it is built on monetary expansion. I recently did a Twitter thread about this, and I was asked to do a video by it. Let's see, Peloton Trooper. So he asked me to do a video on this, so I'm going a little bit more into detail for you there. So number one, we have the boom. So what causes the boom? We have to understand the boom is different than general economic growth. So back out with me to the historical system, the long-term historical system, where you have a money supply that is relatively stable. For most of human history, that's what we had, a money supply that was relatively stable because it was gold. So the only way to increase the money supply is to go dig it out of the ground. That's hard to do, number one. And number two, if it costs more to dig it out of the ground than you'd be able to get by selling that new gold, you're not going to do it. And so there is a kind of a cap on the growth supply of money that is gold. That's most of human history. In that system, what we're going to do is look at a closed example. So let's look at a closed economy. There's 10 of us in this little village, okay? And we all have one gold coin. Now, in this system, when we buy and sell from each other, all of the money is just trading hands, right? So many people would look at that and think, oh, well then, there's no possibility for growth of wealth, right? Because the money supply is fixed. So you can never actually get more money unless you're taking it from somebody else. And so if you take more money, that's going to leave less money for other people. But we have to remember there's a difference between money and wealth. So money just measures the wealth. As we exchange with each other, we are constantly building real wealth. We are getting real resources out of the ground. We are performing real labor, real services, building real products. So let's say I'm a farmer and I figure out a way one day to make a steam engine, and I get a steam engine and I power a little tractor that I build, and I invent a tractor for myself. Now I don't have to feed as many animals. Now I can do the labor for me, to till the soil, to do whatever I want that tractor to do. And I can replace a lot of human or animal labor with that for a much lower cost. Suddenly, what I've done is I've increased the wealth, because now I can increase the output of food. But guess what? There's the same amount of money going back and forth. So what is that going to do? It's going to increase the supply of food. That's going to push the cost of food down. Now, if somebody else now wants to buy that food from me, now there's a greater abundance of food available, so we can charge less for it. That means they're going to buy food from me. They're going to have more money left over now to do something else. They're going to fix that leak in their roof, or they're going to put an extra room on their house. Well, that means now there's more money going to the carpenter or the contractor, the construction worker who's going to do that extra construction. So as you can see, with a fixed supply of money, the total pool of wealth does continue to grow and people get richer by way of things getting cheaper. So you get more abundance of things. It costs less labor to get more stuff. Your input results in a greater output over time. And so the total stock of wealth grows, life gets better, life gets richer, life gets more abundant. Just because prices go down doesn't mean you're not getting wealthier. That's real economic growth, and that's what has happened for all of human history. That is just normal economic growth. That's not a boom. A boom is something else. A boom is, imagine in that closed economy, I happen to find, without doing any labor, I just find on my property 10 more gold coins. Now, I know in circulation there's only 10 gold coins, so I've just basically found as much money as everybody else has combined, and I didn't have to do anything to get it. So what am I going to do? Well, before I couldn't afford to expand my house, to get an extra cow, to, get more shoes, whatever it is that I want in this little village, but now I can afford that. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy another cow, and it's going to be at the normal cow price, and I'm going to get that. And then the person who sold me that cow now has more money than they would have otherwise, and they're going to be able to take their extra profits and go buy something. And I'm going to continue to spend my money as well. And so new money enters this closed economy, and people feel rich because they think, wow, I just got more money than I would have gotten before. And so now they can go out and afford to spend it on something else. But very quickly we realize we've expanded the money supply very rapidly, but we haven't expanded the total stock of real wealth. And so prices start to get driven up to the point where now prices are higher once all the money has worked its way throughout our local economy. And now we can't afford anything anymore. Milk is more expensive, water's more expensive, food is more expensive. And now we can't afford those higher prices because there's not any more of an influx of money. So this is where we get a boom. And once you reach that point where all the new money has worked its way through, then you will have to readjust to the new reality. The problem is most of the time throughout history, you don't just wind up one day having an extra pile of money out of nothing. Normally, it's built on debt. When you look back at history, like what we're doing right now, this big extra pile of money was built on debt. The government borrowed this money and they spent it into existence. Corporations borrowed this money and then they spent it. Households borrowed this money and they spent it. So we got a lot of money that entered the economy, but it's through debt. So now let's say instead of me finding in that local economy, me finding those extra gold coins, I went to a bank and I borrowed 10 gold coins. Well, at some point I'm going to realize, hey, I spent all that money, prices are going higher, things are getting tougher, I got to pay off that debt. And so now I start to pay that debt off. What does that do to the supply of money in the economy? It starts to subtract the supply of money. The supply of money starts to go down. Now, suddenly, somebody at one point or another will not be able to afford those higher prices anymore. So they'll offer a lower price for something. That means the next person won't have the same amount of income. They'll have less income, so they will only be able to afford lower prices. So the prices will collapse again, and people will realize, oh, we thought we were wealthier because prices were higher, but in reality, we just spent money that was measuring wealth differently. We expended more of our savings than we really had, even though we thought we had more. Really, we were just measuring our wealth differently. And then people realized they were worse off than they were before as that debt gets to be repaid. Now, the other option with that debt is that it is defaulted on, right? Because I could just say to the bank, well, I'm sorry, I spent it all, I don't have the money, and I'm going to default on it. In which case, you end up back in the scenario we were at before, where it's like I just found the money, spent it, and we get the big boom, and prices will adjust later because the new money entered the economy, and now I can't pay it back, so I'm not withdrawing that money back out of the economy. However, this still results in an economic slowdown because in reality, that bank is a player as well. And so in reality, in the larger economy that you and I live in, when that bank gets a default, they can't count that as an asset anymore. And when they can't count that as an asset on their balance sheet anymore, that restricts and eliminates the amount of other lending that they are able to do, which starts to slow down the amount of money in circulation. And so we have to bring that bank into our local economy here, because that will start to unwind the total amount of money, at least the total amount of money in terms of how it's growing. It'll limit that growth and potentially start to unwind it as people are relying more and more on debt. Now they have to go the other way. That starts to unwind. Now, what happens if we try to avoid that fall in prices by inflating the debt away? Meaning that I have a couple gold coins, and so what I do is I just chop them in half because there's no rule against that, and I pay it back with those instead. Just like the government is doing, just like governments have done throughout history, you reduce the value of each unit of currency that's currently in circulation so that you can pay back that debt, understanding that you're paying back that debt like just to the letter of the law, right? You're giving back that $10, but everything that used to cost $10 now costs $20. So you're really giving back purchasing power worth a lot less than what you really borrowed. There's two outcomes that can come from this. Number one, you fail and the bust happens anyway, meaning that you try and continue to push prices up, but you don't create enough inflation. You don't print enough money. You don't expand the money supply enough to cause prices to continue to rise. And so the prices collapse anyway. This is very similar to what happened during the Great Depression. Government and the Fed did many things, tried as hard as possible in order to stop prices from falling, but they weren't successful at it. Prices fell anyway. They took crops. Remember, this is the Great Depression when people were starving. They took crops and they burned them down. This is called the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Agricultural Adjustment Act, I think. You can look it up. But they literally, while people were starving, were paying farmers for all their crops, for their livestock, for their food, and then they just go burn it because they were trying to limit the supply to drive prices back up. So they did a lot of things in order to try to push prices up, but they didn't do enough. The bust happened anyway. The second thing that might happen if you try and avoid the bust using inflation is that you succeed, in which case you get a crack-up boom. Republican Germany type of situation happen where you do successfully print a bunch of money in order to stop prices from falling. You result in a collapse of the currency, hyperinflation. The value of the currency just evaporates because you're on a treadmill. You have to keep on printing more and more and more and more, and prices just go to infinity. The value of the currency goes to zero, and there's a giant monetary reset. All right, and finally, I promised you we would look at historical examples that don't meet this criteria, and you'd think there would be a bust, and then you didn't see a bust, and so you think, well, it doesn't fit with what happened in history in reality, so this must not be true. One good example of this is the 70s. A lot of people look at the 70s and they're like, oh yeah, that was Nixon's fault. It wasn't. The reality is America had run out of gold because we had printed money for decades, exported those dollars overseas for decades, and those dollars had started to come back home. We had promised the world, if you ever give us this dollar back, we'll give you gold in its place. So we started printing a bunch of dollars, sending them overseas, getting cheap stuff. And then the rest of the world was like, I don't think there's enough gold for all these dollars floating around. So they all went and asked for their gold back. Pretty soon, those gold reserves in America got to the point where we were 2 weeks away from running out of gold. So Nixon had a choice at that point. I'm not defending him. I'm not saying he was a good president or anything like that, but he had a choice. He could have let all the gold run out, or he could have said, we're going to stop letting gold run out when we're 2 weeks away. That was the choice that he made, was to say, hey, we're going to stop redeeming dollars for gold. Because if he wouldn't have, then we would have been out of gold anyway, and then we would have stopped redeeming gold 2 weeks from then. So either way, it was baked into the cake already from 2 decades of abusing the power of the rest of the world using the dollar. And so that's the first example here, is that you saw the inflation happen in the 70s as a result of the 50s and the 60s and the bad monetary and fiscal policy that happened during those decades. There was a big boom. People felt rich. People felt like everything was great. People felt like there was good policy. But in reality, we were just sowing the seeds for a big consequence later on. Similar thing is happening right now. During the 2000s and the 2010s, many people felt like things were getting better. There was economic growth. Things were growing. But we were sowing the seeds for 2 decades bad economic policy, bad fiscal policy, and bad monetary policy. And suddenly now we're starting to feel the results. So when you look back at history and you think, oh, okay, there was boom here, but we didn't follow it with a bust, just zoom out more. You're going to see this. A lot of times these things take a lot longer than you would originally think. The second example of this is productive output. Now imagine going back to our original example, there's, the 10 of us and I discover a steam engine. If I would have borrowed a bunch of money, spent it, and then at the same time discovered a steam engine and then taught everybody how to use it, and everybody now has close to free food compared to what it cost to get that food before. Now suddenly you might be in a situation where it doesn't matter that all that new money entered in terms of prices might actually stay relatively the same because we have a massive output of food, but we also have that influx of new money. And so we have a productive output that exceeds the amount of new money that enters the system. So that new money just soaks up that extra wealth. And so prices then could stay relatively stable because of that. So as you have advancements in productive output, you can also increase the money supply along with that, and you'd experience pretty much no price changes. Or if you have a huge increase in economic output and only a little bit of an increase in the monetary supply, you're probably still going to experience some deflation because you have more wealth, but not the same amount of new money to measure it. So prices are going to go down. This is what happened when women entered the workforce. Massive output of productivity increase. So that was one thing that hid a lot of the bad economic policies of the time, is because, well, we doubled the size of our workforce. Is that a good thing? No, it's not a good thing. It's not a good thing that it used to be that we could have one person do the work to be able to provide the needs for a household. And now we need 2, 3, 4 people to work to provide for the needs of the household. I'm just saying that's the reason why you didn't see some of the consequences, was because productive output increased. Basically, we had to work harder as a nation. We started producing more. More people were putting in more hours of labor, working harder. And so you're going to have an increase in the total stock of wealth that will cover up for the bad monetary policy of increasing the money supply. So those are the two things that normally happen if you look back at history and you think, hey, there's a boom, there should be a bust. There wasn't. Either you're not zooming out far enough, you're not looking at a large enough period of history, or you're also seeing at the same time some massive leap in productive output from women entering the workforce, the internet, agricultural revolutions, industrial revolutions, things like that. Hope that makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments section below. And as always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.